Imagine working the day shift at a chocolate factory.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, you're just standing there, mixing massive vats of cocoa. You're polite to your coworkers. Maybe you make some small talk about the weather. You eat your lunch in the break room.
Just a totally normal, mundane Tuesday.
Exactly. And then you clock out, you take the bus home to your quiet, unremarkable apartment building, and you step into a literal living nightmare, a
Right.
physical hellscape that you have meticulously, purposefully built.
It's the ultimate cognitive dissonance. I mean,
Hmm.
how a human mind can hold those two realities simultaneously without completely fracturing.
Yeah, it's wild. Welcome to this deep dive, everyone. If you're joining us, grab a coffee and pull up a chair.
Seriously, we need the caffeine.
We really do. We've basically been up all night, just surrounded by this massive stack of case files, trial transcripts, psychiatric evaluations.
Fountains of paperwork.
Right, and today we're not just reading down a timeline of the crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, the timeline is pretty well known.
Yeah, we want to put the human brain on trial here. We're trying to figure out the how.
Exactly. How does a seemingly quiet kid from the Midwest construct that kind of double life?
And how did the systems around him, like the police, the courts, the community, fail so spectacularly that he was able to operate for over a decade?
And ultimately, when you finally catch someone like this, how does a modern legal system even begin to categorize a mind that is this profoundly disturbed?
Right. But before we get into the weeds of those files, we owe you all a very clear content warning.
Yeah.
The source material we're looking at today deals with some of the absolute darkest corners of human behavior. We're talking extreme violence, sexual assault, severe mutilation.
But we're going to keep this completely grounded. We aren't here for gratuitous graphic horror stories.
No, not at all. We are staying firmly in the clinical and forensic zone.
Right. We want to understand the psychological mechanisms and the structural failures to keep this exploration as analytical and, respectful as possible.
Because as we were going through these psychiatric reports, one central question just kept glaring at us.
It really did. And keep this in your mind as we go through the evidence today.
If we strip away the sensationalism and look at this purely through the lens of modern behavioral science and the law, what is the actual tangible line that separates a mind that is legally, certifiably insane from a mind that is just calculating and purely evil?
It's the pivot point of the entire case.
It is. And the deeper you look into the psychology, the more you realize that line is terrifyingly thin.
It really is. So let's go back to the origins, the early environment, because you don't just wake up one day and start dissolving evidence in a 50-gallon drum.
Right, there's always a starting point.
Exactly. So Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer is born in May 1960 in Milwaukee, but the family moves around a bit, eventually landing in Ohio.
Okay.
And if you look at the earliest pediatric notes, he's actually described as a normal, happy kid. Ebullient, even.
Really? Ebola.
Yeah, like an energetic, happy toddler. But the sources pinpoint this massive, jarring behavioral shift right around his 4th birthday.
Okay, what happens at 4?
He develops a double hernia and has to undergo surgery. And the post-operative change is it's night and day.
Wow.
He stops talking, he becomes incredibly withdrawn, physically rigid, just completely subdued.
Let's break down why that matters from a developmental psychology standpoint.
Yeah, please do.
At 4 years old, a child's entire universe is their own body. That is their only real locus of control,
Right.
The cognitive capacity to understand why you are in a hospital, why strangers are putting you to sleep, and why you wake up in excruciating pain just isn't there yet.
They just feel the trauma.
Exactly. Some of the forensic theorists in these files suggest that this specific invasive surgery triggered a massive early onset anxiety regarding bodily integrity.
Wow.
There's even a documented note that young Jeffrey believed his genitals had been cut off during the procedure.
Wait, really? I didn't see that note.
Yeah, it's buried in one of the psychiatric evaluations.
So it's not just the physical pain of the recovery. I mean, if your brain, at 4 years old, perceives that your body has been invaded and permanently altered without your consent, you experience this profound, terrifying loss of autonomy.
Precisely.
Does the brain, overcorrect later? You suffered a loss of control over your own physical form, so you develop this pathological obsession with controlling the physical forms of others.
That is a very prevalent theory in the forensic profiling of this case. You're seeing the planting of a seed of profound physical insecurity.
That makes a lot of sense.
And then You have to look at the soil that seed is planted in, the household dynamic.
Right, which was not great.
No, the psychiatric reports call it an environment of unstable family solidity.
That's a very polite way of putting it.
It's very clinical.
Yeah.
His mother, Joyce, was struggling with severe, debilitating depression and hypochondria.
Yeah, there are records of a suicide attempt using the tranquilizer Equinil.
Exactly. She was emotionally and sometimes physically completely unavailable.
And his father, Lionel, was a research chemist, and his doctoral studies kept him out of the house for long stretches.
So you have a household filled with intense arguments, deep resentment, and a child who is just vanishing into the background.
Which leads to this detail that honestly stopped me in my tracks when I read it.
Oh, the bones.
Yes. So Lionel is trying to be a good father, right? He sees his son is withdrawn, he wants to connect,
He's trying.
and he notices that Jeffrey is really fascinated by the animal bones they find in the dirt under their house.
Right.
Now, Lionel is a chemist. He thinks, well, great, my kid has a scientific analytical mind. We can bond over biology.
Makes sense on paper.
So he actually takes the time to teach a young Jeffrey the exact chemical processes for bleaching and preserving animal bones.
Yes, it's a tragic miscalculation.
It really is.
Lionel thought he was nurturing an academic curiosity. He showed him how to use solvents, how to deflesh a carcass, how to preserve the skeletal structure.
He's just doing dad stuff.
Right, but what he was inadvertently doing was providing his son with the technical, mechanical groundwork for his future disposal methods. He was teaching him the chemistry of preservation.
It's like a dark, twisted version of a father-son science fair project.
That's exactly what it was.
But actually, how do we evaluate that? Is that the moment where the obsession with the macabre becomes hardwired into his brain? Or was this just a typical childhood, morbid curiosity like kids who pull the wings off flies that just spiraled because of his isolation?
The behavioral experts argue it's the collision of the two.
Okay, how so?
The fascination with carcasses collecting roadkill, keeping these dried bones he called fiddlesticks in jars of formaldehyde, that might have started as a sterile scientific interest.
Just a weird hobby.
Yeah, but as he hits puberty, the profound emotional isolation acts as an incubator. He is internalizing all this frustration, all this loneliness, and the interest in biology transitions into something possessive and sadistic.
Ah, I see.
He wasn't just observing anymore. By his early teens, he was actively decapitating roadkill.
Right, the files note an instance where he impaled a dog's head on a stake in the woods behind his house.
The physical act of destruction became a coping mechanism for his internal chaos.
It really forces you to look at childhood behaviors through a completely different lens.
It does.
Think about how innocent a hobby can seem in the moment, and how utterly terrifying it looks in the rearview mirror when you know what it metastasizes into.
Right. It's the ontogenesis of a predator, playing out in a quiet Ohio suburb.
So let's follow him into adolescence, the era we could really call his lost years.
Yeah, high school.
He's at Revere High School in Bath, Ohio. The picture painted by his classmates and teachers is of a ghost.
Just completely invisible.
He's completely isolated. He's an outcast. On top of the chaotic home life, he is internally dealing with the realization of his homosexuality, which, in the 1970s Midwest, he felt he had to keep buried deep away from his parents.
The pressure must have been immense.
And his coping mechanism for this intense, crushing social anxiety is to act out in the most bizarre ways. His classmates actually coined a term for it.
I remember this.
Yeah, they called it doing a Dahmer.
Right.
He would suddenly start bleating like a sheep in the middle of a quiet classroom. Or he would throw himself into the lockers in the hallway and simulate an epileptic seizure.
From a psychological standpoint, that behavior is a massive red flag. But maybe not in the way people think.
What do you mean?
It's not just a class clown looking for attention. Psychologists refer to this kind of performative disruption as a mask of sanity.
A mask of sanity.
Yes, he is intentionally playing the role of the unpredictable weirdo to obscure what's actually happening inside his head. It's a smokescreen.
Oh, wow.
Because while he's faking seizures in the hallway, his internal monologue is being consumed by dark, violent, necrophilic fantasies.
He later admitted those fantasies were occupying roughly 2/3 of his waking day.
Exactly. The clown routine was a defense mechanism to keep people from looking too closely at him.
And the fragile structure of his life completely collapses right around his high school graduation in 1978.
The perfect storm.
His parents' marriage finally detonates in a deeply bitter divorce. Joyce takes his younger brother, David, and moves away. Lionel is living in a motel.
Leaving him completely untethered.
So you have an 18-year-old Jeffrey Dahmer left completely alone in this empty family home in Ohio for months. No supervision, no structure, no one watching.
And the window between his graduation and his first murder is terrifyingly short.
It is. In June 1978, he picks up a 19-year-old hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks.
Right.
He brings him back to this empty house. They have some beers, listen to music. But when Hicks says he needs to leave to go to a concert, the abandonment trigger flips.
That intense fear of being left alone again.
Dahmer bludgeons him from behind with a 10-pound dumbbell, strangles him, and then uses the exact anatomical and chemical techniques he learned as a kid.
Preservation techniques.
Yes. He dissects the body, dissolves the flesh in acid, and crushes the bones with a sledgehammer, scattering them in the ravine behind the house.
Which immediately establishes the core methodology that he would use for the rest of his life.
Yeah, it's fully formed right from the start.
But what happens after that first murder is equally important for understanding the timeline. He doesn't immediately kill again.
Right. There's a huge gap.
He tries to re-enter normal society. He attempts a stint at Ohio State University. He drops out after just 1 quarter.
Then his father pushes him to enlist in the U.S. Army.
He trains as a medical specialist, gets stationed in West Germany, but is eventually discharged. And if we look at the military and academic records, there is one overwhelming constant factor for all these failures.
The alcohol.
Severe, chronic, debilitating alcoholism.
Yeah, this was not just a teenager partying in the dorms.
Not at all. During his high school years, he was smuggling hard liquor whiskey and scotch into the school, concealed in his jacket lining.
He was attending classes completely inebriated.
In the military, he was hiding bottles in his bunk. He was drinking from the moment he woke up until he passed out.
Basically self-medicating to an extreme degree.
Yes. But we need to understand how the alcohol functioned for him chemically and psychologically.
Right, it wasn't just about getting drunk.
The sources are very clear that alcohol acted as the ultimate psychological lubricant. Initially, he used it to numb the extreme isolation, to drown out the stress of his parents' divorce, and to suppress his own confusing sexuality.
That makes sense for standard substance abuse.
But on a neurological level, heavy alcohol abuse severely depresses the prefrontal cortex.
Remind us what that part of the brain does.
It's the part responsible for impulse control, moral reasoning, and evaluating consequences. It's the brain's braking system.
Which brings us to 1987, almost a decade after he killed Stephen Hicks.
The second murder.
Dahmer is back in Wisconsin, living in a hotel room, and he kills his second victim, Stephen Twomey.
Right.
But the chilling detail in his confession is that he told investigators he had absolutely zero memory of committing the murder.
A total blackout.
He claimed he was in a profound alcoholic blackout. He said he just woke up the next morning hungover and found a dead body in his bed with its chest crushed in.
And that forces us to pause and ask a really complex behavioral question.
Okay, what is it?
If alcohol was the trigger that lowered his inhibitions enough to physically commit murder, what does that mean about the monster inside him?
Was it always there?
Exactly. Was the monster fully formed and just waiting in a cage for the alcohol to unlock the door? Or did the severe substance abuse over a decade actually construct the monster by completely eroding his impulse control?
Right, because if you suppress your prefrontal cortex every single day for 10 years, you are essentially damaging the braking system of your own brain.
Yes.
But does the alcohol put the thoughts there in the first place?
The clinical evaluation suggests it's the former.
Okay, so the monster was waiting.
Yes. The urge to dominate, the necrophilic fantasies, the terror of abandonment, that architecture was already deeply embedded in his psyche due to the early trauma and his specific paraphilias.
The monster was there.
But the alcohol was the skeleton key. One of the forensic psychiatrists at his trial explicitly noted that Dahmer had to drink to overcome his own deeply ingrained moral inhibitions.
He knew it was wrong.
He knew killing was wrong. The alcohol didn't create the violent fantasy, but it successfully dissolved the mental barriers that kept him from acting on it.
Okay, so if the alcohol dissolved the internal cage, moving into his own apartment is what gave him the physical space to let those impulses run completely unchecked.
It provided the privacy he needed.
Between 1987 and 1991, the timeline of his crimes just accelerates at a terrifying pace.
It's a massive escalation.
He goes from the hotel room to storing remains in his grandmother's basement, and then finally, in 1990, he moves into the Oxford apartments.
924 North 25th Street in Milwaukee.
Apartment 213, this becomes his personal, isolated hunting ground,
Yes.
and his victimology becomes incredibly rigid. He is specifically targeting marginalized young men, mostly Black, Asian, or Hispanic.
He's looking for people he thinks society might not immediately miss.
Right. He's finding them at gay bars, bathhouses, or even just bus stops. And his primary bait is almost always the same. He offers them $50 or $100 to come back to his apartment to pose for nude photographs.
And when we break down the clinical how of these crimes of the Oxford apartments, we see a modus operandi that is entirely based on chemical subjugation, not physical overpowering.
He wasn't hiding in the bushes jumping out at people.
Exactly. He was using pharmacology. He would invite them in, mix them a drink, usually rum and coke, and he would heavily lace it with a drug called halcyon.
Halcyon. I've seen that mentioned in the files constantly. What exactly is that doing to a person?
Halcyon, the generic name is triazolam, is a very powerful, fast-acting benzodiazepine.
Like Xanax or Valium?
Similar class, but is primarily prescribed for severe insomnia. It knocks you out.
Okay.
When you ingest a heavy dose, especially mixed with alcohol, it acts as a massive central nervous system depressant. It causes severe motor impairment, profound lethargy, and crucially, anterograde amnesia.
Meaning what? They forget what happened.
Meaning, the victim loses the ability to form new memories while under the influence. It essentially turns off the victim's ability to fight back, flee, or even comprehend the danger they are in.
That is terrifying.
Once the halcyon took effect and they were unconscious, Dahmer would typically strangle them. But to truly understand this case, you have to understand the psychological motive behind why he preferred them unconscious.
Because usually when we talk about serial predators, there's this element of the thrill of the hunt, right?
Exactly.
The sadistic joy of overpowering someone who is terrified.
But Dahmer's pathology was fundamentally different. Based on hundreds of hours of interviews, the forensic consensus is that his primary driver was not sadistic dominance.
What was it?
It was an extreme, pathological, paralyzing fear of abandonment.
Wow.
He engaged in necrophilia, cannibalism, and keeping the skulls of his victims not out of a desire to inflict pain, but because in his deeply warped reality, this was the only guaranteed method to ensure these men would never ever leave him.
He was permanently possessing them, which leads to the most horrific detail in these files.
Yeah.
The zombie experiments.
Yes. This is where the delusion reaches its absolute peak.
He wasn't satisfied with them just being dead.
No, he wanted them alive, but entirely compliant, stripped of their free will so they couldn't choose to walk out the door.
So he engaged in these crude, horrific surgical experiments on living, drugged victims.
It's hard to even read about.
He would drill small holes into their skulls and inject hydrochloric acid or boiling water directly into their frontal lobes.
It's beyond comprehension.
Structurally, mechanically, how does a human brain manage that level of horror and then go to work the next morning?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because we talked about the chocolate factory earlier. That wasn't a metaphor. He literally worked the day shift mixing chocolate at the ambrosia factory.
Right.
He's clocking in, making small talk, interacting with society. Then he goes home to an apartment where he has severed heads in his refrigerator and a torso in a freezer.
It's like his brain built a firewall between two entirely different dimensions of reality.
That extreme compartmentalization is a hallmark of how predators survive undetected. He constructed an impenetrable facade of mundanity.
He really did.
If you look at the interviews with his neighbors, or even the one victim who managed to survive early on, they described him as polite, soft-spoken, the classic boy-next-door trope.
He weaponized that conventional, harmless demeanor to deflect any scrutiny.
Right, like when neighbors at the Oxford apartment started complaining to the landlord about the horrific, putrid smells coming from apartment 213.
He didn't panic.
No, Dahmer calmly explained that his refrigerator had broken down and a bunch of meat had spoiled. Or he said his tropical fish had died.
And people accepted it because it's a normal, annoying apartment problem. He used the boring, everyday mundanity of life as a shield for his absolute pathology.
And that shield of mundanity, combined with some really dark systemic flaws in society, brings us to the structural failures that allowed this to go on for so long.
The institutional blind spots.
Because Jeffrey Dahmer didn't just hide well, society and its institutions actively, repeatedly failed to catch him.
We have to spend some time talking about the night of May 27th, 1991.
Yes, because if there is one incident in this file that will make your blood boil, it is the story of Connor X and the sump phone.
It is undoubtedly one of the most tragic, frustrating, and heavily scrutinized aspects of the entire case.
Connor X was a 14-year-old Laotian boy.
Just a kid.
Dahmer lures him to the apartment, drugs him, and begins his horrific process. But Dahmer steps out to get some beer, and Konarak actually manages to escape.
Makes it out.
He wanders out into the alley and onto the street. He is completely disoriented, heavily drugged with halcyon, naked, and bleeding.
And this is where the neighbors step in.
Right. 3 black women in the neighborhood, including a woman named Glenda Cleveland, see this boy wandering in the street.
They know something is deeply wrong.
They immediately recognize that this is a child in severe distress, and they call 911. 2 Milwaukee police officers, John Balserzak and Joseph Gabrich, arrive on the scene. Right around this time, Dahmer comes back from the store. He walks up, perfectly calm, polite, and tells the officers that Konarak is not a child.
He lies to their faces.
He claims Konarak is his 19-year-old adult boyfriend, that he just had too much to drink, and that this is merely a lover's quarrel.
And this is the moment where we have to shift from psychology to sociology.
Yeah, we have to look at the bigger picture.
We have to analyze how this interaction played out the way it did. The sources strongly point to profound institutional biases operating on multiple levels.
What kind of biases?
You have 2 white police officers responding to a call in a predominantly black, low-income neighborhood. They are confronted by black female residents who are actively pleading with them, telling them, look at him, he is a child, he doesn't speak English, he needs help.
They were begging them to listen.
But the officers look at the situation, and they choose to believe the calm, white, well-spoken Dahmer.
They literally escort the drugged, bleeding 14-year-old boy back inside the Oxford apartments.
They leave him there with his killer.
So wait, you're telling me he just handed the kid back?
They handed him right back.
And what makes it infinitely worse, from a purely mechanical procedural standpoint, is the forensic reality of that interaction. The officers are standing in Dahmer's apartment.
Yes.
If they had simply picked up their radios and run Jeffrey Dahmer's name through dispatch for a basic standard background check,
The dispatcher would have immediately seen that Jeffrey Dahmer was currently on probation.
Exactly.
And not for a minor offense. He was on probation for second-degree sexual assault of a child. He had been convicted of molesting a 13-year-old boy in 1988.
And by a horrific, almost unbelievable coincidence, that 13-year-old boy was Konarak's older brother.
It's staggering. The system had all the puzzle pieces.
All of them.
They had the killer on probation. They had the victim physically out of the apartment. They had witnesses literally begging them to intervene. And bias completely blinded them.
It takes another 2 months and several more murders before the final night on July 22, 1991.
When it finally ends.
A 32-year-old man named Tracy Edwards is lured to the apartment. He realizes the danger, manages to punch Dahmer, and escapes out the front door with a pair of handcuffs still dangling from one wrist.
He flags down a passing police patrol car and leads the 2 officers back to apartment 213.
The officers go inside, primarily just to get the key for the handcuffs. But while looking around, one of the officers opens a bedside drawer and discovers nearly 80 Polaroid photographs.
And those photographs were the undeniable proof. Dahmer was meticulously documenting the dismemberment of his victims.
The officers see the photos, they open the refrigerator, they look in the blue barrel in the corner, and the 13-year nightmare instantly comes to an end.
He doesn't even put up a fight.
Dahmer doesn't fight them, he doesn't try to run, he just lets them tackle him to the ground, and he tells the arresting officers, "For what I did, I should be dead."
Which raises this massive historical what if.
Yeah, I think about this a lot.
If this exact scenario, the Konarak situation, happened today, with modern protocols, mandatory background checks, body cameras, and hopefully a much more heightened awareness of implicit bias, would those police officers have stepped into that apartment in May and shut this down?
You would hope so.
It makes you realize how much of criminal history and how many lives are lost or saved is dictated purely by the prejudices and the structural blind spots of the era.
Dahmer weaponized the homophobia that led officers to dismiss a lover's quarrel between 2 men, and he weaponized the racism that led them to ignore the black neighbor.
He used society's own biases to maintain his privacy.
It's a textbook example of a predator exploiting the margins of society.
It really is.
And once he is finally in custody, the focus shifts entirely. The physical hunt is over, and the psychological hunt begins.
The greatest minds in forensic psychiatry descend on Milwaukee to try and map out the architecture of his brain.
Which brings us to a major, fascinating debate highlighted in our sources. Was Jeffrey Dahmer actually a psychopath?
Let's define that, because psychopath is a word thrown around constantly in true crime. But clinically, it has a very specific meaning, right?
Exactly. It's not just a catch-all for a bad person.
To understand this, we have to look at the psychological framework, specifically applying Dr. Hervey Cleckley's concept of the mask of sanity and Dr. Robert Hare's psychopathy checklist revised, or the PCLR.
Okay, the PCLR.
The easiest way to explain this is to contrast Dahmer with the cultural baseline for a serial killer, Ted Bundy.
Right, Bundy is the archetype, the classic psychopath.
Bundy was a textbook psychopath. If you look at Factor 1 of the psychopathy checklist, which measures interpersonal and affective traits, Bundy maxes it out.
He had the charm.
He was highly charismatic, incredibly manipulative, socially adept, superficially charming, and possessed a grandiose sense of self-worth.
But completely hollow inside.
Exactly. He lacked any genuine emotional core, empathy, or remorse. He killed for the thrill of power, dominance, and the sadistic pleasure of watching the light go out in someone's eyes.
Now, when the forensic psychologists applied that same PCLR checklist to Jeffrey Dahmer, the results were surprising. He scored significantly lower than someone like Bundy.
Why? Because he didn't have the charm.
Because Dahmer was not smooth. He was not socially adept or manipulative in a grand sense. He was incredibly awkward, deeply introverted, and highly socially isolated.
So what was his actual diagnosis?
The clinical diagnoses he received were a complex cocktail of severe disorders. He was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, severe alcohol dependence, and extreme paraphilias.
Let's pause on paraphilias. What exactly does that term encompass in a clinical setting?
A paraphilia is a condition where a person experiences intense sexual arousal to atypical objects, situations, or individuals.
Okay.
In Dahmer's case, it manifested most prominently as necrophilia, a sexual attraction to corpses.
Combined with the borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by an intense, unstable fear of abandonment, his psychological profile was fundamentally different from a psychopath's.
Right. His crimes weren't driven by a desire to exercise sadistic dominance over a conscious, living person.
As we discussed with the Halcyon, he preferred them unconscious.
His actions were driven by compulsive emotional disturbances. He had an absolute paralyzing terror of being left alone, and his paraphilias dictated that the only way to prevent abandonment was to turn the person into an inanimate object that he possessed.
That perfectly aligns with the context of his jailhouse interviews.
How so?
When you read the transcripts, he sounds almost detached. He insists to the investigators that he hated the actual killing part.
He hated it.
Yeah, he viewed the murder merely as a logistical hurdle, an unpleasant means to an end to gain total control so the person could never leave him. He just wanted to preserve them to keep him company.
Right. A true psychopath kills for the joy of the kill. Dahmer killed because his severe psychiatric disorders convinced his broken mind that it was the only functional way to alleviate his profound, crushing loneliness.
But wait, let me push back on this because this is where the philosophy of justice gets really murky.
Okay, lay it on me.
If we sit here and put him on a clinical spectrum, if we say, well, he was suffering from borderline personality disorder, severe abandonment trauma, and uncontrollable paraphilias, do we risk minimizing the sheer calculated evil of what he did?
That's a fair question.
I mean, he walked into a hardware store and bought a 50-gallon drum. He bought gallons of muriatic acid. He deliberately went to bus stops to lure people. Where's the line between a broken, sick mind that needs a hospital and a wicked, evil mind that needs a cage?
That tension, that exact push and pull between sick and evil is what defined the trial in early 1992.
Because he didn't deny it, right?
No, Dahmer didn't deny what he did. He confessed completely. The defense he mounted was guilty but insane.
How does that work in Wisconsin?
Under Wisconsin law, a trial with an insanity plea is bifurcated, meaning it's split into two phases. Phase 1 establishes if the defendant committed the acts, he admitted he did, so Phase 1 was over immediately.
So the whole trial was Phase 2?
Yes. The entire trial, Phase 2, was exclusively about his mental state at the time of the crimes.
And the atmosphere inside that courtroom was unprecedented. You have Dahmer sitting behind an 8-foot-tall barrier of bulletproof glass to protect him from the gallery.
Which is wild to picture.
You have massive, palpable racial tension in the city because of how the police had ignored the black community's pleas.
Understandably so.
And sitting in the jury box are 12 everyday laypeople, plumbers, teachers, retail workers, who were suddenly tasked with looking at this horrific, stomach-churning evidence, listening to dense psychiatric jargon, and deciding the ultimate binary. Is this man legally insane, or just legally evil?
And what played out was a fascinating high-stakes clash of expert witnesses.
Who had the burden of proof?
The burden of proof in Wisconsin for an insanity defense is on the defendant. They have to prove that due to a mental disease or defect, they lacked the substantial capacity to either appreciate the wrongfulness of their conduct or conform their conduct to the requirements of the law.
So either he didn't know it was wrong or he couldn't stop himself.
Exactly. So the defense brings in their experts, Dr. Judith Becker and Dr. Carl Wallstrom.
And what did they argue?
They testified that Dahmer was unequivocally legally insane. Dr. Becker argued that his severe necrophilia was a driving mental disease that had evolved into an uncontrollable compulsion.
They pointed to his extreme delusions, right?
Yes, specifically his elaborate documented plan to build a temple of skulls in his apartment using a black table and painted skulls as clear evidence of active psychosis.
They painted a picture of a man whose sick urges were a runaway train, completely divorced from reality.
Okay, but then the prosecution brings in their heavy hitters to counter that narrative.
Right. The prosecution calls Dr. Park Deitz, a highly renowned forensic psychiatrist, and Dr. Frederick Fosdal.
And their stance was the complete opposite.
They argued that Dahmer was completely legally sane. They did not deny that he was sick. They agreed he had personality disorders and severe paraphilias.
But sickness isn't insanity in the eyes of the law.
Exactly. They argued fiercely that having a sick mind does not mean you lack the capacity to understand right from wrong or the capacity to control your actions.
And the evidence they used for that capacity was his premeditation.
Yes. Dr. Dietz meticulously broke down the timeline of the crimes to prove premeditation.
How so?
He pointed out that Dahmer went to great rational lengths to avoid detection. He purposefully chose victims who were marginalized or transient, calculating that they wouldn't be reported missing as quickly.
That shows clear, logical planning.
When he was with the corpses, he used condoms to avoid contracting sexually transmitted diseases, a highly rational self-preserving act. He bought deodorizers and set up specific ventilation fans to mask the smell from his neighbors.
All of these actions prove, undeniably, that he knew what he was doing was illegal and morally wrong, and he was actively, intelligently taking steps to not get caught.
But the real mic drop moment for the prosecution, the argument that really seemed to sway the jury, went all the way back to the alcohol.
Oh, right, the alcohol as a tool.
It was a brilliant piece of forensic deduction by Dr. Dietz. He pointed out the behavioral pattern we discussed earlier. Dahmer had to get heavily intoxicated to commit the actual murder.
Right.
Dietz argued that if Dahmer was truly compelled by an unstoppable, uncontrollable psychotic impulse to kill, if he was a runaway train, he wouldn't need to drink alcohol to overcome his moral inhibitions.
That is such a strong point.
The fact that he had to chemically numb his conscience to commit the act proved that he had a functioning conscience, and he was making a conscious, deliberate choice to bypass it.
It's a fascinating standoff. The defense is essentially saying his desires and his actions were so incredibly bizarre, so far outside the realm of human normalcy, that he must be crazy by definition.
But the prosecution is saying, no, look at the timeline, look at the fans, look at the alcohol. He meticulously, rationally planned every step of his own madness.
It really feels like trying to weigh a hurricane on a bathroom scale.
That's a perfect way to conceptualize it.
The legal system requires a binary answer, sane or insane. It's a switch that is either on or off. But a human mind, especially one this severely damaged, doesn't operate in binary.
No, it exists in shades of severe, complex pathology.
The bathroom scale of the law just isn't built to quantify the hurricane of his brain.
And ultimately, the jury had to make a choice using that scale. After weeks of grueling testimony and just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury sided with the prosecution.
By a vote of 10-2, they found that while he was clearly suffering from mental disorders, he was not legally insane. He possessed the capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct and the ability to control it.
So the trial concludes. Dahmer is found sane and sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in Wisconsin, plus a 16th life term added later for his first murder in Ohio.
Wisconsin doesn't have the death penalty, right?
Correct. So he is sent to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, to live out his days.
Did he stay in solitary?
Initially, he requests protective custody, knowing his high profile makes him a target. But after his first year, he decides he wants to integrate into the general population.
That seems like a risky move.
He starts attending church services. He even gets baptized in the prison whirlpool by a visiting minister, claiming he has found God and repented.
But the story of Jeffrey Dahmer doesn't end with a quiet religious conversion in a cell.
Fast forward to the morning of November 28, 1994. Dahmer is assigned to a work detail, cleaning the prison gymnasium bathrooms.
And he's assigned this detail with two other inmates, a man named Jesse Anderson, who had murdered his wife, and a convicted murderer named Christopher Scarver.
And the physical layout of that morning is crucial to understanding how the case comes to its brutal, definitive end.
You have three convicted murderers in a gymnasium bathroom and locker room area.
And for a window of roughly 20 minutes, they're left completely unsupervised by the prison guards.
20 minutes is a long time in a prison.
Now, Christopher Scarver, according to his extensive later interviews, was fiercely disgusted by Dahmer. Not just by the crimes themselves. Scarver actually kept a newspaper clipping about Dahmer's crimes in his pocket, but by Dahmer's daily behavior inside the prison walls.
What was he doing?
Scarver reported that despite this supposed religious awakening, Dahmer had a deeply disturbing habit of taunting other inmates and the prison guards.
How so?
He would fashion severed limbs out of prison food, shaping them, and then use ketchup packets to simulate blood, placing them where people would find them.
Which just shows you that the compulsion, the dark, obsessive humor of the macabre never really left him. The environment changed, but the brain didn't.
Precisely. The pathology was still operating. So in that 20-minute unsupervised window, Scarver snaps.
He retrieves a 20-inch heavy metal bar from a piece of exercise equipment in the weight room.
He hides it in his pants and follows Dahmer into the locker room area. He confronts Dahmer, pulling out the newspaper clipping, asking him if he really did those things.
Dahmer reportedly panics and tries to escape toward the door.
Scarver swings the heavy metal bar, bludgeoning Dahmer repeatedly, crushing his skull. Scarver then calmly walks over to the shower area, finds Jesse Anderson, and does the exact same thing to him.
When Scarver finishes, he drops the bar, returns to his cell, and simply tells a guard, "God told me to do it. Jesse Anderson and Jeffrey Dahmer are dead."
But there has always been a lingering, incredibly dark question about the mechanics of that morning.
What's the question?
Scarver later claimed in interviews that he strongly suspected the prison guards left them unsupervised on purpose.
That they set it up.
He believed the guards knew exactly how much he hated Dahmer, they knew the tension was escalating, and they basically unlocked the door, walked away, and gave him the window of opportunity to execute the man the state legally couldn't.
It's a suspicion that has never been officially proven by any investigation, but it hovers heavily over the final chapter of this narrative.
Scarver explicitly stated years later they had something to do with what took place. Yes, it brings up the incredibly dark reality of prison justice.
It's the ultimate grim full circle. His life ends at age 34 on a bloody bathroom floor with the exact same severe blunt force trauma to the head that he inflicted on his very first victim, Stephen Hicks, 16 years earlier.
Whether the system turned a blind eye or was just gross negligence, the state of Wisconsin, which had abolished the death penalty way back in 1853, ultimately oversaw the violent execution of its most notorious prisoner.
The symmetry of the violence is undeniable.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, we need to pull back from the clinical terminology, the forensic timelines, and the legal debates, and remember the immense, suffocating human toll of this case.
17 lives were violently, senselessly extinguished, 17 futures erased.
And the ripple effect of that trauma permanently shattered entire families and communities.
When the news of Dahmer's murder in prison broke across the country, the reactions from the victims' families were deeply mixed.
Some felt a sense of cosmic justice or relief, but others felt a profound, unresolved emptiness.
Catherine Lacey, the mother of victim Oliver Lacey, gave a quote to the press that really anchors the tragedy of this entire saga. She said, "The hurt is worse now because he's not suffering like we are."
It's a sobering, heartbreaking reminder that the death of a perpetrator does not magically erase the trauma of the victims. It doesn't put the pieces back together.
No, it really doesn't.
But if we try to look at the historical legacy of the Jeffrey Dahmer case, it did force some necessary, albeit incredibly painful, structural changes.
It forced the Milwaukee Police Department and law enforcement agencies nationwide to hold a mirror up to their own institutional racism and homophobia.
It highlighted in blood how marginalized communities are disproportionately vulnerable to predators when the systems designed to protect them refuse to listen.
And within the field of forensic psychology, it fundamentally shifted the paradigm.
It changed how we view the complex intersection of severe paraphilia, early childhood trauma, substance abuse, and criminal responsibility.
It expanded our understanding of how a predator operates, not just through physical force, but through chemical manipulation, the exploitation of societal blind spots, and the weaponization of everyday mundanity.
It is a incredibly heavy subject, but a vital one to understand if we want to comprehend the extremes of human behavior.
We want to thank you for sitting at the table with us tonight for this exploration, but before you go, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
We talked at the beginning about the central question of sanity versus evil.
If the ultimate line between being deemed a sick patient in need of treatment versus an evil monster deserving of a cage is ultimately decided not by a perfect scientific instrument, but by a jury of 12 everyday people sitting in a courtroom trying to weigh a hurricane on a bathroom scale, how confident can we ever really be in our society's ability to truly measure and understand the darkest corners of the human mind?
Think about that the next time you read a true crime headline.
Until next time.